He stood at the edge of the auction yard, clutching a crumpled envelope, his last hope of saving the farm his wife once called sacred. They laughed at him. They always did. Until one black SUV pulled up, and everything changed. This is not just a story about land or loss. It's about a promise, a woman's legacy, and the love that grew again, where everyone else saw nothing but dust. If stories like this move you, inspire you, or help you believe in kindness again, consider subscribing. We'd love to have you stay for the journey. Now, let me tell you the story of the single dad and the sunflowers that never forgot. The wind moved gently through the dried stalks of sunflowers, whispering like a woman's breath in memory. Ben Carter stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed against the early autumn chill, his weathered boots planted in soil he had walked since boyhood. The once vibrant blooms now drooped, their golden heads bowed as if mourning. He knew the feeling. Behind him, the creak of a screen door broke the silence. "Daddy," came a small voice. "Are they going to come back?" Ben turned. Elijah stood on the porch in his oversized hoodie, hands in the pockets, curls tousled from sleep. The boy's eyes, soft brown, just like his mother's, locked on the dying flowers. He wasn't talking about seasons. He was asking if anything good ever returned once it was gone. Ben crouched in the dirt and patted the earth beside him. Elijah ran over and sat. "They will," Ben said gently, brushing some soil aside with his hand. "But not on their own. Sometimes you gotta fight to bring something back." Elijah tilted his head. "Like Mama's sunflowers?" Ben nodded. "Like Mama's sunflowers." They sat in silence, father and son, beneath a sky bruised with early morning clouds. For a long moment, Ben let himself believe that maybe that was enough. To simply be here, to keep the land breathing, to honor Elise in the only way he knew how. But as the silence stretched, reality returned, cold and unforgiving. Tomorrow was the auction. After Elijah had gone back inside, Ben opened the envelope that had arrived that morning. Notice of public auction. Property. 12B, Carter Farm. His hand trembled. He read the rest, already knowing every word. The payments had fallen behind. His side jobs driving delivery trucks and fixing equipment hadn't been enough to keep the farm afloat. He'd sold the tractor, the hay baler, even Elise's greenhouse, everything but the land itself. And now that, too, was slipping through his fingers. He sat on the porch swing Elise had built from old timber. Her initials, EFC, were carved faintly into the armrest. He traced them with his finger, like a prayer. "You said this land has a soul," he murmured aloud, voice cracking. "What if I'm too broke to save it?" His eyes stung, not from the wind. The town of Wayfield had changed in the years since Elise passed. More subdivisions, less heart, fewer people farming, more people flipping property. The folks who came to the auctions weren't neighbors anymore. They were developers with money in their eyes and Starbucks in their hands. And Ben? He was just the guy with the dead wife and too many bills. Still, he'd show up tomorrow. He had a plan. Not a good one, but a plan. He'd saved just enough to put in a low bid, one last shot. If no one challenged it, maybe he could keep the back 5 acres, where Elise's sunflowers still fought to grow. If he lost, he didn't have the strength to think beyond that. He looked out at the field again. Back then, Elise had called it her sanctuary. She'd planted rows by hand, even when chemotherapy stole her strength. She said the flowers turned their heads to the sun because they remembered the light, even in darkness. "We can do the same," she told him. But after she was gone, the light faded. And no matter how hard Ben worked, it never came back the same way. That night, while Elijah slept, Ben walked the field alone with a flashlight and a flask. The wind had picked up, stronger now, like the land itself was restless. He knelt where Elise's favorite chair once stood, near the wooden arch she had draped with morning glories every spring. The vines were dead now, cracked, hollow. "I don't know how to save this place, Lisa," he whispered. I promised you I would." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small linen pouch tied with a yellow ribbon, Elise's final gift. Inside were seeds, marked Sun or 7, experimental. She'd worked for years crossbreeding a special sunflower, one she believed could thrive in poor soil and dry summers. She'd died before testing it. He had never dared to plant them. Until now. With shaking hands, he opened the pouch and pushed one seed into the earth. "I'm still trying." At dawn, Ben loaded Elijah into the pickup truck. Neither of them spoke much on the way to the courthouse lawn where the auction would be held. Elijah clutched a thermos of hot cocoa and stared at the line of people gathering, most of them strangers in blazers and leather shoes. A few familiar faces nodded stiffly. Most didn't look at him at all. When the auctioneer called Lot 12B, Ben stepped forward, heart thudding. "I'm placing a bid," he said firmly. Laughter echoed from the crowd, sharp, derisive, mean. A tall man in a golf vest barked, "With what? Loyalty points? And prayers?" Ben didn't answer. He handed the envelope of cash to the clerk. "You're serious?" The auctioneer blinked. Ben said nothing, only looked toward the field, his field, the field that still remembered her. Charlotte Hayes wasn't supposed to stop in Wayfield. Her original itinerary had her scheduled to visit 3 organic co-ops across the state, collect soil data, and meet with 2 small-town mayors, all under her role as the Director of Sustainable Agriculture Initiatives. It was a long title that meant even longer days filled with policy briefs, coffee-fueled roundtables, and endless discussions that rarely saw a speck of soil. But Wayfield hadn't been on the list. She only pulled off the highway for gas, and maybe a breather. The kind of breather you don't realize you need until your hand starts shaking and your lungs forget how to do their job. The gas station was forgettable, the people even more so, except for one. Charlotte noticed him first because he wasn't moving. There he stood, just across the road, by a rusted fence bordering a sunlit field of dying flowers. Tall, broad-shouldered, still as a soldier. She couldn't explain why she parked the car and stepped out. Maybe it was something about his posture, rigid, resigned, or the way the little boy beside him reached up to hold his hand, like it was the only anchor he had in the world. They didn't see her. Not yet. She stayed on her side of the road, hidden behind her sunglasses and government-issued field jacket, pretending to check her phone while watching him kneel in the dirt and brush his hand over the soil like it was sacred. It was then she noticed them, the sunflowers. Most were wilted, but a few still held their heads high, yellow petals catching the light like tiny lanterns. In that moment, she felt it. Not just the sorrow, but something else beneath it. Hope. Or maybe defiance. Charlotte had spent the past year in sterile labs and boardrooms talking about climate resilience and rural economic models, but she hadn't felt the land in months. Until now. By the time she checked into the roadside inn, her laptop had already pulled up the county records. Carter, Benjamin T., owner of Parcel 12B, veteran, widowed, in default. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just the field that was dying. It was his whole life. She wasn't supposed to interfere. She knew that. As the daughter of a sitting governor, Charlotte had grown up under the spotlight of "don't get involved." Her father didn't make decisions with his heart, and certainly didn't want his daughter to. But something about that man. The next morning, Charlotte showed up early at the courthouse lawn. She stayed back, leaning against a tree, arms crossed as the crowd gathered. The boy, Elijah, she later learned, sat quietly on the tailgate of a battered truck, clutching a thermos like it was a lifeline. Ben stood tall beside him, jaw clenched, and when he placed that envelope in the auctioneer's hands, she heard it again. That hollow laughter. It made her stomach twist. "Who is he?" she asked the woman beside her. The woman gave a tight-lipped smirk. "Ben Carter. Nice guy. Too proud for his own good. Thinks he can save that land with a few bucks and a war medal." Charlotte turned her eyes back to Ben. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just stood there, letting them laugh, like he'd done it 100 times before. That was the moment she reached for her phone. "Dad," she said quietly, "you need to listen. Governor Harold Hayes was not a patient man, especially before noon. Charlotte, you better not be calling me from another protest." "I'm not protesting," she said. "Yet," he sighed. "What's this about?" "There's a man named Benjamin Carter, war veteran, single dad. The town's auctioning off his farm because he missed payments, and a bunch of vultures in khakis are circling it like it's a new subdivision. Charlotte, he's not asking for a handout. He's trying to buy it back, on his own. They're laughing at him, Dad." She paused. "And he's standing there, like he's willing to lose everything and not blink." Her father was quiet on the line. She pressed on. "You always say we should support people who stand on their principles. Well, he is. And all he has left is that land, and that little boy beside him." Harold exhaled. "What do you want me to do?" "Delay the sale. Intervene. Give him time. Just don't let them bulldoze his life because he's not rich." After a long pause, her father grunted. "I'll make some calls." That evening, Charlotte stood outside the fence again. This time, Ben saw her. He walked over cautiously, Elijah trailing a few steps behind. He didn't say anything, just waited, guarded. Charlotte removed her sunglasses. "I heard about the auction," she said softly. Ben looked away. "Didn't go how I hoped." "I saw what you tried to do. It was brave," he scoffed. "Bravery doesn't keep the lights on." She stepped closer, carefully. "I've worked with heirloom crops and alternative botanicals. I noticed your sunflowers. They're different." Ben's brows furrowed. "My wife bred them," he said. "Spent years in that greenhouse, mixing strains. Said they could thrive in poor soil, maybe even have healing properties. But she passed before she could prove it." Charlotte's heart skipped. "Do you still have her notes?" Ben nodded. "Somewhere." She hesitated, then said what she had been thinking since the moment she saw the field. "I think there's something here, Mr. Carter. Not just soil or sunflowers. I think there's something worth saving." The courthouse lawn had never been so crowded. Ben stood near the edge of the crowd, the rough envelope in his hands now soft from being clutched too tightly. Elijah sat on the tailgate of the pickup, swinging his legs, sipping cocoa in silence. The boy's thermos had a cartoon bear on it, chipped at the edges, like so many things in their life lately. Ben didn't look at anyone. He didn't have to. He could feel their eyes on him, some pitying, some curious, most indifferent. He'd seen this scene before in other forms. The silent judgment, the tight-lipped smiles, the dismissive shrugs. Small towns were like that. They remembered your triumphs, but they carved your failures into stone. A silver SUV pulled up and parked near the curb. Out stepped the man in the golf vest. Chad Dalton. Ben recognized him. Real estate developer. Slick talker. Perfect teeth. The kind of guy who bought land just to flip it. He didn't grow a thing in his life, but he always had a hand on something ready to bloom, just so he could sell it. Dalton grinned as he walked past Ben. "Heard your bidding, Carter," he said with a smirk. "Gotta admire the optimism. Or is it just pride?" Ben didn't flinch. He'd fought in sandstorms and watched good men die. Words like that couldn't pierce him. But Elijah shifted beside him, small hands tightening around the thermos. "Daddy," he whispered, Are they gonna take Mommy's flowers? Ben knelt beside his son, met his eyes squarely. Not if I can help it. The auctioneer stepped up on the wooden platform, a microphone in hand, cowboy hat tipped back, smile wide as a cash register. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Up next, Lot 12B, 24 acres of prime, south-facing land with exceptional resale potential. Ben flinched. They didn't even mention the sunflowers, or the greenhouse, or Elise's name. It was as if she never existed. I'll open the bidding at $20,000. Do I hear 20? Chad Dalton's hand shot up like a flag on the 4th of July. 20, he barked. Ben stepped forward. 10,000, he said clearly. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, the opening is at 20. I have 10, cash in hand. Dalton let out a dramatic sigh. You're wasting everyone's time, Carter. Ben pulled out the envelope, handed it to the clerk, and turned back to the auctioneer. I may not have 20, but I'm the only one who'll actually use that land, not gut it for condos. There was a brief, stunned silence. A woman whispered, That's his late wife's farm, right? Another man muttered, Well, he's not wrong. The auctioneer shifted uncomfortably. We'll need to verify. Before he could finish, a deputy approached the platform and handed him a folded note. He opened it, read it, then read it again. He looked up, puzzled. Lot 12B has been temporarily withdrawn from auction by executive order, per the office of the governor. Gasps erupted like popcorn. What the hell? Dalton growled. He doesn't have that kind of pull. Ben froze. His heart slammed in his chest. Did Charlotte do this? The auctioneer raised both hands. Folks, I don't have further details, but as of now, the property is not for sale. Ben stood in stunned silence as the crowd began to disperse, some murmuring, others grumbling. Dalton stormed off toward his SUV, barking into his phone. Elijah jumped off the tailgate and ran toward his dad. Daddy, did we win? Ben blinked, still trying to process. I don't know, buddy. Maybe. Later that afternoon, Ben found Charlotte waiting at the fence line again. She leaned casually against a wooden post, the sleeves of her field jacket pushed up, her sunglasses tucked into her hair. The late sun hit her from behind, casting a soft halo around her frame. Was that you? He asked without preamble. Charlotte didn't smile. It was my father. I just told him what mattered. Ben narrowed his eyes. Why would he care? She shrugged. Because I made him care. A pause hung in the air like a suspended breath. I don't need a handout, Ben said flatly. I didn't offer one. He watched her closely. She didn't flinch. So, what are you offering? Charlotte stepped forward. A chance. Ben waited. I think there's something special about this land, she said. Not just sentiment. Not just flowers. I think you and your wife were onto something, and I'd like to help you find out what it is. Ben crossed his arms. Why? She hesitated, then looked up, eyes clear. Because I lost something once too, and it almost made me stop believing in what could grow from ruin. They walked the field in silence. Charlotte bent down to inspect the stalks, brushing her fingers over the coarse leaves. These are different, she murmured. Narrower leaves, thicker stems, and the oil sacs are unusually full. Ben nodded. She crossbred them with wild strains, said they could handle drought, even poor soil. Did she ever extract the oil? He shook his head. She got sick before she could try. Charlotte looked up. I'd like to help you harvest them. Take a few samples back to my lab, run an analysis. Ben's jaw tensed. And if it's worth something, you'll offer me a check and walk away? She took a step closer, voice calm. No. If it's worth something, we build it together. A brand, a business, something that honors what she started. Ben said nothing for a long time. Then finally, quietly, her name was Elise. Charlotte smiled gently. Then let's find out what Elise left behind. Charlotte returned the next morning, dressed in worn jeans and boots that had clearly seen fieldwork before. She wore her hair pulled back, no makeup, no pretense. She came not as a politician's daughter or a government consultant, but as someone who respected the land. Ben noticed all of it from the porch. He didn't wave. He simply stood and waited, arms crossed, as she approached with a clipboard in one hand and a quiet purpose in the other. "I brought some equipment," she said, "if that's all right." He nodded once. "The sunflowers don't mind visitors." Elijah peeked through the screen door, then ran out with bare feet and a curious stare. Charlotte knelt to greet him, smiling gently. "You must be Elijah." He looked her over, then pointed to her clipboard. "Are you going to test our dirt?" Charlotte laughed softly. "Something like that." Ben watched the exchange with a guarded expression. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to his son, like he was more than a shadow of grief. They walked the field together, Ben beside her, Elijah trailing a few paces behind, occasionally plucking dry petals to stuff in his pocket. Charlotte moved slowly through the rows of stalks, stopping often to examine the leaves, the seeds, the stems. She took photos, notes, and samples with methodical care. "Your wife was onto something," she finally said. Ben glanced toward the northern edge of the field. "That's where she started the greenhouse. You still have it?" "Sold the frame for scrap last winter. Needed heating oil." Charlotte said nothing, but her throat tightened. Ben caught her expression. "Pity's not helpful." She met his eyes. "That's not pity. That's anger." He raised a brow. Anger that someone with this kind of vision had to choose between warmth and possibility. Ben didn't answer, but something flickered behind his eyes. They returned to the house as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, turning the fields into rivers of gold. Ben poured 2 mugs of strong coffee and set them on the porch railing without asking if she drank it. "Her name was Elise," he said quietly, breaking the silence. Charlotte looked up. "She grew up here. Her parents farmed until the bank took it in '98. We bought back half the land with the savings I had from the Marines. She wanted to grow beauty, not just crops." Charlotte listened. She said people needed beauty to believe, especially the kind that grew even when everything else said it shouldn't. He paused, then chuckled dryly. She talked about sunflowers like other folks talk about religion. Charlotte smiled softly. "Maybe they're the same thing." Ben sipped his coffee. "You remind me of her. A little. I hope that's a compliment." "It is." Elise never waited for permission to do the right thing. There was a stillness between them, not heavy, but charged, the kind of silence that only happens when grief starts to shift into something softer. Charlotte reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. "I scanned your property records last night. Do you know what this is?" Ben took the paper, his brow furrowed. "It's a patent filing. Elise filed it 4 months before she passed. It's provisional, but it's there." She documented her hybrid strain, the one growing out there right now. Ben stared at the page. "I didn't know. She believed in it enough to claim it, even while she was dying." He looked away, jaw clenched. Charlotte continued, "If we move fast, we can file a full patent. Legally, the strain would be yours, and Elijah's." Ben rubbed the back of his neck. "Why are you really doing this?" Charlotte hesitated, then said with rare honesty, "Because I've been where you are. Not on a farm, not with a child, but lost. I poured everything into a job, a marriage, a life that looked good on paper, but it didn't mean anything." She paused. "Then one day, I looked around and realized I didn't know what I stood for anymore. This field, your story, Elise's vision. It reminded me. Ben's voice softened. Of what? That real things take root slow, but when they do, they last. They worked through the next few days like people who had no choice but forward. Charlotte brought a portable centrifuge and a digital press. Ben cleared a space in the barn. Together, they extracted their first small batch of oil from the seeds, thick, golden and fragrant with something faintly sweet and earthy. Charlotte ran her first tests on the spot. She blinked as the chemical profile loaded. High in linoleic acid, vitamin E, and gamma tocopherols, she whispered. In English? It's rare. This oil could be restorative, topical skincare, inflammation reduction, even calming for nervous system disorders. It's not just a sunflower, it's medicinal. Ben looked stunned. She glanced up, beaming. Elise knew. They stared at the shimmering vial of oil between them. Elijah stood nearby, watching with wide eyes. Is it magic? He whispered. Ben looked down at him. No, son. It's love. That's the closest thing we've got. Ben had never shared his barn with anyone before. It wasn't much to look at. Weather-worn beams, rusty hinges, and the distinct scent of hay, oil, and thyme. But lately, it had started to feel like something more. The left wall now held a makeshift table, covered in notes and charts. Charlotte's laptop blinked steadily beside vials of amber oil, and in the far corner, a small electric heater hummed near a drying rack filled with sunflower seeds. It was, as Elijah declared, a science fort. Ben had grinned at that. The truth was, Charlotte brought a kind of order to the chaos. She worked deliberately, scribbling in her notebook, analyzing oil extractions, cataloging results. And somehow, she never looked out of place, even with sawdust in her hair and dirt on her jeans. Sometimes Ben caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, not with hunger or longing, but something quieter, like curiosity, or maybe recognition. That afternoon, the sun peeked through gray clouds, casting long shadows across the barn. Ben sat on an overturned crate, elbows on his knees, watching as Charlotte calibrated a small device. Where'd you learn all this? He asked. Berkeley. Then 2 years in Oregon with a botanical startup, she said without looking up. But most of what matters I learned from old women with dirt under their nails and stories in their bones. Ben smiled at that. Sounds like Elise. Charlotte glanced at him. You miss her? He nodded slowly. Every day. They sat in silence for a beat, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for filling. She'd like what you're doing here, Charlotte added softly. Ben looked down at the floorboards. Some days I wonder if she'd like what I've become. Charlotte closed her notebook. You're a man still fighting for something that matters. That's rare. He chuckled bitterly. I don't feel rare. I feel like a washed-up vet with a truck full of overdue bills and a son I can barely keep in shoes. Ben, her voice was firmer now. You're raising a kind, gentle boy in a world that doesn't make that easy. You kept this farm alive when no one else cared. You stood in front of a crowd and didn't flinch while they laughed. Don't tell me that's not enough. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, someone saw the man he used to be, or the one he still could become. Later that evening, the sky turned the color of cinders, and Charlotte returned to her motel, promising to return after dinner. But the call came just after 9. Ben answered on the second ring. I don't feel right, Charlotte said weakly. I think can you? Her words slurred. The line went dead. Ben didn't think. He pulled on his jacket, grabbed his keys, and drove like the world was on fire. He found her slumped against the side of the bed, pale and drenched in sweat. The room smelled faintly of something off, like spoiled herbs and metal. "Charlotte," she stirred, but barely. Ben lifted her carefully and placed her on the bed, grabbing a cool towel from the bathroom. "Stay with me," he muttered, pressing it to her forehead. She murmured something incoherent. Beside her open bag, he noticed a small, broken jar, one of the oil samples. The lid hadn't sealed properly. It had spilled inside, mixing with something else. Her notebook was stained. Ben reached for her phone and dialed the nearest urgent care. But before he could hit call, Charlotte gripped his hand. "No hospitals," she rasped. "It's okay. It's just a reaction. I've had them before." Ben stared at her, torn between fear and fury. "You should have told me." "I didn't think it would happen again," she whispered. "It's only when I mix unfiltered compounds too quickly." "You could have passed out alone," he snapped. "What if Elijah had found you?" She blinked up at him. "But you found me." His chest tightened. He didn't respond. Instead, he helped her sip some water and adjusted her blanket. When her breathing steadied and her color returned, he sat beside her in the dim light, shoulders tense. "I lost Elise in this house," he said quietly. "One morning she couldn't breathe. By the time I got to the hospital..." He couldn't finish. Charlotte reached for his hand. "I'm not her," she said. "But I'm not going to disappear either." Something in her voice, a soft vow wrapped in exhaustion, made him believe her. The next morning, the barn was quiet. Charlotte insisted on working, though Ben hovered like a storm cloud. She wore gloves now, more careful than before, but her eyes were still bright with that focused spark he'd come to recognize. Elijah brought them sandwiches around noon, placing them carefully beside the microscope like offerings at an altar. "Do you think Mommy knew the sunflowers could heal people?" he asked. Charlotte smiled. "I think she hoped they could, and hope is the first step to healing." Elijah nodded solemnly. "I want to help, too." Ben reached over and ruffled his hair. "You already are, kid." Charlotte met Ben's eyes across the table. In that moment, something passed between them. Wordless, tender, steady. Not romance, not yet. But trust. And trust, like sunflowers, only grows when it's planted in the light. The vial sat in the center of the table, no larger than a thumb, yet it held the gravity of a monument. The oil inside shimmered, clear, golden, and just slightly viscous. A soft, nutty scent with floral undertones curled through the air. Not overpowering, not artificial, just right. Like something that belonged in a garden at dusk, or a prayer whispered into warm earth. Charlotte stared at it, blinking in disbelief. "We did it." Ben didn't speak. He only nodded, arms crossed, as he leaned against the barn post, his eyes never leaving the vial. For days, they had worked on the extraction process, adjusting temperatures, refining filtration, pressing seeds Elise had once nurtured by hand. The failures were many. Burnt samples, cloudy results, wasted materials. But today, something clicked. It was the first time in years Ben had seen a tangible result come from a promise. He walked toward the table and picked up the vial, rolling it gently between his fingers. This came from her flowers. Charlotte nodded. "It's more than oil, Ben. It's proof. What Elise started wasn't just a theory or a dream. It's real, and it's valuable." The word valuable hung in the air like a spark near dry wood. By that afternoon, Charlotte had uploaded a full-spectrum analysis and initial findings to her network of botanical specialists. The responses were immediate. "Where did you find this strain?" "This oil could revolutionize small-scale therapeutic skincare." "Any samples available for lab replication?" Charlotte smiled at first, then hesitated. She turned toward Ben, who was sorting a new round of seeds near the drying rack. "We have something," she said, handing him her tablet. He scrolled through the messages slowly, his face unreadable. Then, "They want to buy it?" "Some are asking for licensing rights. One offered to fly out tomorrow." Ben set the tablet down carefully. Charlotte watched him. This could mean funding, equipment, fast-tracked testing. It's not a bad thing. He gave a short nod, then turned back to the seeds. But his hands moved more stiffly now. That night, they didn't speak much. Ben sat on the porch steps, while Elijah lay inside coloring sunflowers with a green crayon that had been used down to the paper. Charlotte emerged with 2 mugs of tea. "You haven't said much," she said, sitting beside him. Ben took a long sip before answering. "Feels like it's not ours anymore." She frowned. "Ben, this is yours." "Elise's. We're just proving its worth. But once we let someone else in, the story changes. It becomes a product, a commodity." He exhaled. "And I lose her all over again." Charlotte looked down. "You're not wrong. But what if, just what if, this story could heal more than just you?" Ben didn't respond, so she continued. "Think about it. If Elise's flowers could help a mother with scarring feel beautiful again, or calm a soldier's racing heart, wouldn't she want that?" He looked out into the field. The stalks swayed in the wind like they were listening. "She always believed beauty belonged to everyone," he murmured. Charlotte's voice softened. "Then maybe it's time we share it." The next day, the SUVs arrived. 3 black vehicles, tinted windows, polished rims. They parked just outside the fence line like they didn't belong, because they didn't. A man in a crisp blazer stepped out, followed by 2 assistants. He extended a hand toward Ben with a perfectly practiced smile. "Mr. Carter, my name is Graham Ellis. I represent Everhaven Botanicals. We were quite taken with your samples." Ben looked at Charlotte. She gave a polite nod, arms folded tightly across her chest. Graham continued. "We'd like to offer you a licensing agreement. Exclusive. We take over production, branding, and distribution. You keep a share, of course." "How big a share?" Ben asked. 10% of profits, guaranteed. "We'll also rebrand the strain under our wellness line, Solaris TM." Ben's brows lifted. "Solaris?" "Our market research suggests consumers resonate with Latin-rooted branding." Charlotte stepped forward. "The flowers are called Elise Sun 7. That's the strain name. It's personal." Graham didn't miss a beat. "Of course, we could honor that somewhere in the product story, perhaps as a footnote in the campaign." Ben's jaw tightened. Graham glanced around the barn, clearly unimpressed. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Mr. Carter, but the longer you stay small, the more likely someone else gets there first. We're offering you a chance to lead the wave." He extended a sleek black folder. Ben didn't take it. Instead, he walked to the side of the barn and looked out at the field. The field Elise had once stood in barefoot, laughing, planting row after row without gloves because she said skin needed to touch soil to mean anything. He turned back. "I'll think about it," he said. Graham nodded, clearly expecting the deal to close by week's end. But Charlotte could tell something in Ben had shifted, and it wasn't toward yes. That night, Charlotte found Ben in the barn, sitting alone at the table, staring at Elise's seed pouch. "She gave everything to grow these," he said. "Not for money. Not even for recognition. Just to remind people there's still beauty in this world." Charlotte sat across from him. "I won't push you," she said. "But I will say this. Sometimes, the best way to honor someone's dream is to let it grow bigger than they ever imagined." He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't full of grief, but something else. Conviction. And a little hope. He reached across the table, lifted the vial between them, and held it to the light. "We're not selling it," he said softly. "We're building something, with her name on it." Charlotte nodded, a smile forming slowly. "Elise Fields," she said. And in the quiet hum of the barn, a new promise was planted. The folder still sat on the barn table, sleek, black, heavy with the weight of decisions. It had remained untouched since Graham Ellis and his corporate convoy drove off in a trail of dust. Ben hadn't opened it. He didn't need to. The moment he heard Solaris, something inside him recoiled. Elise's name deserved better than being footnoted behind a Latin catchphrase on a shelf full of overpriced creams. Now, Charlotte stood across from him, arms crossed over her chest, her voice calm but resolute. "They'll call again. Maybe even offer more." Ben glanced at the folder, but didn't move. "Let them." Charlotte studied him. "You're sure?" Ben picked up the seed pouch that Elise had once embroidered with a tiny sunflower stitched in golden thread. His thumb traced it slowly. "I've watched things die on this land," he said. "Dreams, crops, pride. But this is the one thing she planted that's still alive. It deserves to grow on its own terms." He looked at Charlotte now, his voice lower. "I'm not going to sell her name. Word got around. In towns like Wayfield, it always did." By the end of the week, whispers turned into questions, and questions became gossip. He turned down how much? What's he thinking? She must have talked him into it. Ben ignored it. Charlotte didn't. She'd spent her life navigating polished rooms filled with half-truths and sharpened smiles, but nothing stung quite like hearing. That woman from out of town, spoken with that mix of suspicion and disdain. She didn't care about being liked, but she did care about him. One morning, as the sun stretched warm fingers across the barn roof, Charlotte returned from a supply run to find Ben in the field with Elijah. They were planting new rows, seedlings from Elise's last preserved pouch. The boy was laughing, covered in dirt, his cheeks flushed with joy. Charlotte paused to watch from a distance. There was something almost holy about it. The soil, the sun, the legacy of a woman gone, but not forgotten. This wasn't just a farm. It was an altar. Later that evening, she presented her plan. A direct-to-consumer brand, small batch, farm authenticated, every bottle hand-pressed here, the story of Elise in every package. Ben raised an eyebrow. "Sounds big." "It doesn't have to be," Charlotte said. "It just has to be true." They worked late that night in the barn, drafting labels, testing bottle samples, printing prototype tags with Charlotte's portable printer. Elijah colored sunflowers in the corner, humming quietly as the adults bent over pages of notes. By midnight, they had a name, a logo, and their first pre-order form. Elise Fields, hand-grown, hand-pressed, heart-rooted. The next morning, Ben drove into town with Charlotte. It was the first time they had walked into the Wayfield General Store together, not as two strangers, but something approaching partnership. Mrs. Halbrook, the elderly shopkeeper, squinted at Charlotte over her glasses. "You're the one with the fancy car and the clipboard." Ben opened his mouth, but Charlotte stepped forward with a gentle smile. "No clipboard today, ma'am. Just oil." She handed over a small sample bottle of Elise Fields, wrapped in burlap and tied with a yellow ribbon. Mrs. Halbrook unscrewed the cap and sniffed. Then her eyes widened. "Why, that smells like hope." Charlotte laughed, a little surprised. "That's exactly what we were going for." Word traveled faster after that. The store agreed to carry a few samples by the register. Then the local bakery requested a dozen gift baskets, and the town's yoga instructor, who doubled as a part-time social media influencer, posted a glowing video about the sunflower oil that made me feel human again. Within 48 hours, the Elise Fields website crashed from too much traffic. Charlotte stayed up all night recoding it. Ben brought her coffee and watched her work, still marveling at the strange, beautiful collision of worlds between them. But not everyone was thrilled. Graham Ellis returned, this time alone. He caught Ben outside the barn 2 days later, arms folded, smile thinner. "I thought you'd be smarter than this." Ben leaned against the fence. "You thought wrong. You've got demand now. Great. But scaling, fulfillment, packaging, regulation? You're not equipped." Ben shrugged. "Then we'll learn." Graham stepped closer. "You're going to bury your wife's legacy in boutique jars and word-of-mouth sales?" Ben's eyes darkened. "No," he said quietly. "I'm going to grow it, with my own hands, just like she did." Graham stared at him for a moment, then exhaled sharply and turned away. But before he reached his car, Ben called out. "Her name stays on the bottle," he said, "because she earned it. And you don't buy integrity with a checkbook." Graham didn't look back. That night, Charlotte found Ben sitting alone in the field, under a sky speckled with stars. The rows of young sunflowers swayed gently, whispering secrets to the night. She sat beside him, knees brushing his. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Just thinking about how fast everything's moving." Charlotte glanced up. "Good fast or bad fast?" He thought for a moment. "Both," he said. "But I'd rather be running towards something that matters than standing still in fear." Charlotte reached for his hand. "Then let's run together." They sat like that for a long time, hand in hand, breath in breath, surrounded by the promise of things not yet grown, but already alive. The field had never looked more alive. Rows of sunflowers, tall, golden, swaying like they had a song only the wind could hear, stretched across the land in warm, rhythmic waves. The scent of crushed petals and fresh pressed oil mingled with the late summer air. Wooden signs guided guests along a narrow path, past mason jars filled with wildflowers, to the barn, now draped in soft white linen and fairy lights. It was the first official open house for Elise Fields. Charlotte stood near the front steps, checking the last of the guest list on her clipboard. For once, she didn't wear her usual utility jacket or field boots. Instead, she wore a soft cream dress that brushed her knees, with her hair braided simply down one shoulder. She looked like she belonged here, as if this had always been her home. Ben watched her from the other side of the barn, his heart unsettled in a way he didn't fully understand. She looked beautiful. Yes. But it was more than that. She looked right. Like the land had chosen her, just as Elise once had chosen him. He exhaled and adjusted his collar. Elijah tugged at his sleeve. "Are you nervous, Daddy?" Ben looked down. "Maybe a little." Elijah leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. "You should be. Everyone's here." He wasn't wrong. The whole town seemed to have shown up. Neighbors who once doubted, former skeptics now curious, and even the local news crew setting up a tripod by the sunflower arch. And somewhere in the back, Ben spotted a few veterans he hadn't seen since Elise's funeral. Men who had once fought beside him, now standing with hands in pockets, heads bowed in quiet respect. But none of it felt overwhelming. It felt like something Elise would have dreamed. When the ceremony began, Charlotte stepped up to the makeshift stage and took the mic. Her voice was clear and steady. "We started with one vial, one handful of seeds, one story." She paused, letting her eyes sweep the crowd. A story about a woman who believed that healing didn't have to come from far away. That sometimes what saves us is something we plant ourselves. Ben stood just beyond the edge of the barn, his arms loosely folded as he listened. She believed beauty was practical, that even in grief, something could grow. And today, we're not just launching a product, We're sharing her legacy. A legacy rooted right here, in this field, in this family. Charlotte's voice softened. This is Elise's field, and from this day on, the world gets to feel what she left behind. The crowd clapped, quiet and heartfelt. Then Charlotte surprised everyone. "Elijah," she said, turning toward the boy, "would you like to say something?" Ben blinked, startled. "Charlotte!" But Elijah was already walking toward the stage. He climbed the small steps slowly, gripping something in his hand, a folded piece of lined paper. The microphone was almost too tall, so Charlotte knelt beside him, holding it steady as he began to read. "My name is Elijah," he said softly. "My mom's name was Elise. She liked sunflowers. She said they were brave because they looked at the sun even when it was really, really hot." A few people chuckled gently. "She said, when you're sad, you should go outside and try to stand like a sunflower, tall and smiling, even if it's hard." He looked up at the crowd, his voice unwavering. "I miss her. But this place helps me remember that she's not all gone. She's in the flowers, in the smell of the oil, and in everyone who feels better because of what she grew." Ben felt his throat tighten. "My dad says we don't need magic," Elijah continued. "We just need love. And I think that's true." He unfolded something from his pocket, a drawing of a sunflower with his mother's name written in the petals. "This is for her, but it's also for you." He stepped down and handed the drawing to Charlotte, who blinked back tears. The applause that followed was thunderous, not because it was expected, but because it was real. Because the words of a child had said what no adult could, that this wasn't about branding or profit. It was about memory, meaning, and healing. After the ceremony, people milled through the field, dipping their fingers into sample jars, listening to Charlotte explain the process behind the oil, asking Ben if they could walk the rows where Elise once planted by hand. One elderly woman whispered, "It smells like summer when I was 17. Another said, "I haven't felt this peaceful in years." Ben stood back, letting it all soak in. Then Charlotte found him. "I didn't plan to call Elijah up," she said. "It just felt right." Ben looked at her for a long moment. It was. They stood in silence, side by side, the field golden around them. He turned to her then, voice lower. "Do you ever wonder what Elise would say? Seeing all this?" Charlotte nodded. "I think she'd smile, and then hand us a list of things we forgot to do." Ben laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. And Charlotte joined him. They looked out at the rows of sunflowers, swaying in the breeze like dancers in prayer. It was no longer just a field. It was a beginning, a balm, a second chance for things once buried. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Charlotte reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. This time, he held on. The orders came faster than they could fill them. After the open house, Elise Fields exploded, not in fireworks or headlines, but in the quiet, powerful way something true always does. Word of mouth spread through veterans' communities, wellness forums, and small-town networks. A local podcast picked up Elijah's speech and played it on air. By the end of the week, the little shop in Wayfield had sold out 3 times. Ben stood in the barn, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pressing oil with a quiet determination. Sweat beaded at his brow, but his movements were precise, reverent, as though every seed carried Elise's spirit. Charlotte entered, holding her phone like it was on fire. "Okay," she said, out of breath. "We've officially hit our first 100 orders, and that's just from the wait list." Ben raised an eyebrow. "I didn't even know we had a wait list." She grinned. "We do now." She crossed to the table and set down a printed email. The New England Artisan Alliance wants to feature us in their fall catalog, and NPR's local affiliate requested an interview. Ben blinked. NPR? Like the radio? Charlotte nodded. They want to talk about the story, Elise's story, how this all began. They think it's the kind of narrative people need right now. Ben rubbed the back of his neck. Feels like it's all happening fast. Charlotte's smile softened. Because it is. That evening, they sat on the porch swing as dusk painted the horizon in strokes of lavender and gold. Elijah was inside helping pack sample bottles, his tiny hands carefully tying ribbons as if they were sacred. Ben rocked the swing gently, the wood creaking beneath them. "You ever feel like we're riding a train we didn't mean to board?" he asked. Charlotte tucked her legs under her. "Every day." He looked at her, more serious now. "I don't want this to become something Elise wouldn't recognize." Charlotte turned toward him fully. "Then we keep her at the center of it." Ben hesitated, eyes fixed on the darkening field. "And what about us?" Charlotte blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this thing between us. Whatever it is." His voice lowered. "I care about you, Charlotte, and I think you know that." Her breath caught. "But this field, this dream, it started with Elise, and I need to know. If I let something new grow, it won't be stepping on the roots of something sacred." Charlotte's gaze was steady. "Ben, love doesn't replace. It expands. You're not choosing between past and present. You're building on what was good to create what's possible." She reached for his hand, firm but tender. "Elise gave you this land. Maybe she also gave you the heart to open it again." Ben didn't speak, but he didn't let go. The following day, they received a call from Veterans for Wellness, a national nonprofit focused on PTSD recovery through nature-based therapies. They had heard about Elise Fields through a retired Marine who'd driven 4 states just to visit the farm. The proposal was simple but profound. Partner with the foundation to open a small retreat center on Ben's back acres, a place for veterans to reconnect with the earth, use the sunflower oil in therapeutic massage, and simply be. "They don't want to change anything," Charlotte explained. "They want to help fund it. But you'd lead it." Ben sat in silence, fingers laced together. "I served overseas," he said quietly, "but I've never felt more purpose than I do here. Helping people. In her name." Charlotte studied him. "Then say yes." He did. The next few weeks passed in a beautiful kind of chaos, equal parts exhaustion and awe. They expanded the barn workspace, installed new drying racks, and added a second hand press. Ben taught Elijah how to recognize the best seeds. Charlotte set up online donation portals and coordinated with local volunteers. But amid the growth, something else began to take root. Ben caught himself looking for Charlotte's laugh across the field. Her hand brushing his arm felt less like accident, more like instinct. And when she stayed late to work, they shared long silences that didn't need filling. One night, under a harvest moon, Charlotte stood beside him as they watched the final row of blooms sway like a hymn. "I never planned to stay here," she said softly. "Wayfield wasn't even on my map." Ben smiled. "Neither was this. Any of it." She turned toward him. "You changed me." He looked at her, startled by the quiet weight of those words. "You made me believe again," she continued, "in things that grow slow, in men who mean what they say, in love that's not flashy, but steady." Ben stepped closer, voice rough. "I haven't kissed anyone since Elise." Charlotte nodded. "Then don't kiss me because you think it's time." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'm kissing you because I finally feel free to." And when their lips met, it was not rushed or desperate. It was quiet, like rain on dry soil, like something that had waited long enough. They broke apart gently, neither speaking, but Charlotte smiled with eyes wide open. Tell me that was real, she whispered. Ben's voice was low, certain. It's the realest thing I've felt since she left. They stood together, beneath stars and sunflowers, two people no longer surviving, but beginning again. The harvest came early that year, not because of the weather, or the yield, or even the moon's schedule. It came early because the sunflowers, Elise's sunflowers, had bloomed with a brilliance that silenced even the most skeptical of neighbors. Row upon row of golden heads turned skyward, bold and undaunted, like they knew they had something to prove. Ben stood at the edge of the field, eyes closed, letting the breeze carry the scent of dry earth and crushed seeds. It wasn't just the smell of harvest. It was the scent of home. A home rebuilt from grief, row by row, bottle by bottle, heart by heart. Behind him, Elijah's laughter echoed as he raced a wheelbarrow full of dried stalks toward the barn. Charlotte followed not far behind, scolding gently through her smile. Careful with that, speed racer. You break another press and we'll be doing pre-orders with a salad spinner. Ben turned, smiling at the sound of her voice, steady, bright, woven into the very rhythm of the farm now. They were a team, a trio, a small, beautifully messy family, formed not by blood, but by choice and healing. That afternoon, volunteers arrived to help with packaging. Friends, neighbors, and even a few strangers who had heard about Elise Fields and wanted to be part of something that made people feel better, even if just for a moment. Charlotte handed each person a hand-pressed bottle wrapped in burlap and tied with a single ribbon, mustard yellow, Elise's favorite color. The tags read, "Born from a promise, pressed with purpose, Elise Fields, healing from the ground up." One woman, maybe in her 70s, held the bottle close to her chest and whispered, "This reminds me of the perfume I wore the day I met my husband." She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. He passed last spring. But this brought him back for a second. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Some stories speak louder than applause. Later that evening, Charlotte called Ben and Elijah into the barn. "I have something to show you both." She pulled out a rough wooden box. Inside were the very first 12 bottles they had pressed. Small, imperfect, unpolished. Each one had a handwritten label. Each one told the story of its own beginning. "I want us to give these away," she said, "to the people who helped us get here." Ben raised an eyebrow. "You're giving away our collector's items?" Charlotte smiled. "They're not for collecting. They're for remembering. The day we stopped surviving and started living again." She handed one bottle to Ben. The tag said simply, "To the man who kept his promise and gave the world a second chance to feel her light." Ben's eyes stung. He didn't speak. He just took Charlotte's hand. 2 days later, on a clear September morning, they opened the field to the public. It wasn't a grand launch. No fireworks. No speeches. Just a wide-open gate, a table under the old oak tree, and a simple sign, "Come walk where healing grows." People came quietly, reverently. Some walked in silence. Some prayed. Some took selfies. But most just stood, surrounded by golden blooms and a peace that felt older than words. At noon, Ben walked to the center of the field with Charlotte and Elijah beside him. He cleared his throat, called for attention, and held up one of the newest bottles, sleek, elegant, etched in gold leaf. "This is Elise Fields," he said. "It started as a promise to someone I loved, and became something far bigger." He paused. "But this farm, it's not just about memory. It's about hope, about letting things grow again, even after loss." Then he knelt, right there, between 2 rows of blooming sunflowers. Charlotte gasped. Ben held up a small velvet box, its lid open to reveal a ring. Simple, classic, adorned with a sunflower engraved band. Elise gave me years of love, he said, his voice steady. But she also gave me one more gift. You. Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth, tears already slipping free. You reminded me how to feel again, Ben continued. How to fight again. Not just for a farm, but for something that lives and breathes and heals with every sunrise. He looked up at her. So I'm asking, will you help me keep growing it? Together? Charlotte didn't speak. She dropped to her knees in front of him and kissed him like it was the first breath after drowning. Elijah cheered. The crowd clapped. And overhead, the sun broke through the clouds, pouring light across the field, as though Elise herself had pulled the curtain wide. That evening, the last golden rays painted the land in honey. Ben stood at the barn door, Charlotte beside him, Elijah asleep on a hay bale nearby. They watched the final crate of oil bottles being loaded into a delivery van headed for the first national shipment. Charlotte leaned her head on Ben's shoulder. I think we're just getting started, she whispered. Ben looked down at her, his eyes filled with quiet fire. No, he said. I think we just found our forever. Snow fell lightly across the sunflower field, soft, slow, like the sky was exhaling peace. Of course, there were no blooms this time of year. The stalks had long since bowed and returned to the earth. But beneath the frost-covered soil, the seeds lay waiting, resting, not gone. That was something Ben had learned over the past year. Healing didn't always look like bright petals and warm skies. Sometimes it looked like quiet ground and deep roots. Inside the barn, warmth buzzed through the newly insulated walls. The scent of wood smoke, pressed oil, and cinnamon tea filled the space. Charlotte stood at the long wooden work table, her fingers carefully tying ribbons on the winter edition of Elise Fields, a limited run infused with rosemary and wild orange. Ben entered from the side door, brushing snow off his shoulders. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his eyes full of that familiar calm strength. You really want to pack all these tonight? He asked. Charlotte smiled, not looking up. I want to finish what we started. He crossed to her and pressed a kiss to her temple. Then let's do it together. From the loft, Elijah's voice drifted down. I finished labeling the boxes, Ben called up. You're a machine, buddy. I want extra cocoa for this. Charlotte laughed. Deal. The barn had become more than just a place of work. It was now a hub, part warehouse, part workshop, part gathering space. On Sundays, local kids came to learn about seed cultivation. Veterans still recovering from trauma often sat on the porch, sipping tea, watching the wind play across the dormant field. Even tourists had begun showing up, leaving notes of gratitude in the guest book. And through it all, Elise's name remained, not just on the bottles, but in every detail. A carved plaque above the barn door read, Elise Fields, where love grows again. On the anniversary of Elise's passing, they held a small candlelight walk through the field. Not to mourn, but to honor. Neighbors came with lanterns. Veterans came with medals. Children came with questions. Each person took a candle and placed it gently along the old planting rows, forming glowing lines through the snow. Charlotte read a letter aloud that Ben had written, one he never thought he'd share. You gave me more than love, Elise. You gave me a way to keep loving after you were gone. Through seeds, through soil, through a boy who still sees you in every bloom, through a woman who didn't come to replace you, but to help me carry what you left behind. You taught me that when something beautiful ends, it doesn't mean it's over. It means it's becoming something new. The field was silent, lit only by candlelight and quiet breath. Then Elijah, holding a single sunflower head from the last harvest, stepped forward. He placed it gently at the base of the wooden arch Elise had once built by hand, and whispered, Thank you, Mom. Ben's hand found Charlotte's, and together they stood watching 100 small flames flicker like stars rising from the earth. Spring returned slowly that year, but when it did, it came with soft thunder and eager light. The seeds sprouted sooner than expected. Ben knelt in the dirt one morning, fingers brushing the delicate green shoots. He looked up at Charlotte, who stood barefoot in the soil, smiling in that way only she could. "We should teach Elijah how to graft hybrids this year," she said. Ben smirked. "Already ahead of you. He's drawing a plan for a sunflower that smells like hot cocoa." Charlotte laughed. "We might just call that one the Elijah Blend." They stayed like that for a while, barefoot, hands dirty, hearts full, surrounded by green promises and the sound of a land that had forgiven them for letting it rest. One evening in late May, Charlotte found a note on the porch swing. It wasn't signed, just a folded piece of paper with a single sentence, written in Ben's blocky handwriting. "The sunflowers aren't the only thing that came back to life." She turned the note over. Inside was a sketch of a future house on the hill behind the barn, with wide windows, a rocking chair porch, a greenhouse off to the side, and 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sign that read, "Home." Charlotte pressed the note to her chest, the wind lifting her hair like a whisper from someone who still watched, somewhere beyond. She closed her eyes and smiled. In the end, Elise was right. Sunflowers were brave. They didn't just grow. They turned toward the light. Even when the storms came. Even when the skies forgot how to shine. They found the sun again. And so did they. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share your corner of the map with us. It warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. And if this story touched you in some way, we invite you to subscribe. Not out of habit, but because we believe in building a community rooted in kindness, healing, and hope. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence here means more than you know.